Welcome to the Master Your Breath podcast. My name is Tom Richter, and today I welcome Dr. Paul Dallaghan as a guest on this podcast. Paul has been my teacher of Pranayama in the last 14 years and guided me on a one-on-one basis in my Pranayama practices. He has devoted the last 3 decades to developing expertise in the field of breath, mind, body, lifestyle, and has a specialized background that ranges from advanced practitioner to accomplished academic scholar, while also starting Samahita Retreat, a beautiful retreat place on the island of Koh Samui in Thailand. Paul earned a Ph.D. in biological anthropology from one of the leading universities in the US, Emory University. And in this study, he went deep into yoga tradition, philosophy, textual history, as well as a scientific study on yoga and the breath in relation to stress, anxiety, and longevity across physiological, neuroscientific, and psychological disciplines. Equally, he has been acknowledged in the yoga tradition with the unique title of Master Yogi Pranacharya, which translates to expert in breath. He was fortunate at a young age to immerse in the original yogic culture and receive one-on-one direct training in practice along with the study of ancient texts. He's identified as a teacher of teachers and carries the tradition of pranayama forward from Sri O.P. Tiwari and Kuvalayananda's Kavalyadam lineage in India. Paul also dedicated years of practice in Mysore, India to become one of a handful of senior students to be personally certified by ashtanga vinyasa master Sri K. Patabi Joyce after reaching the advanced level of body posture practice. And then in 1999, he established Centered Yoga as a training school for yoga and then relocated to Thailand in 2001, establishing this first yoga breath meditation retreat center in Asia, which is called Samahita Retreat. During this entire time, Paul has continued a daily breath, mind, body practice and taught thousands of students. He believes in the mission of spreading health and well-being through engaged participation in these practices, and also emphasizes that the fields of yoga and meditation are one, not separate techniques, commonly united on the internal path of both an open heart and sincere self-examination. Now, we dive into a couple of these topics today, spanning from how he started his yoga practice, engaged with his teachers back in the 1990s and 2000s, and then his PhD studies and how he designed them, and some of the findings of these studies, which will be published in the coming month. I hope you enjoy our conversation just as I enjoyed talking to Paul. Welcome, Paul, Dr. Paul D. Welcome to the Master Your Breath podcast. It's such a pleasure and honor to have you here. Reappearing after years of study and PhD thesis writing. You're finally out again and teaching and sharing your wisdom. And let's go right into the first question. I met you about 15 years ago, I think, based on a recommendation of my wife, who I was looking for an ashtanga teacher, and she recommended you. And so I came to you because of ashtanga, but you were doing pranayama, I think even before you started ashtanga, were really deeply immersed in it, taught it. And while before I was not really interested in pranayama, it came up, but it was not really my focus. I loved your approach and your details to what is supposed to happen in each technique. And it was essentially the same approach as in ashtanga, in the sense of do it every day. This is your practice. You just repeat it every day. And then at a certain moment, we add something or we take something off. but it stays an individual prescribed practice that you just keep doing over a long time. And because I was doing that already with Ashtanga, I could really relate to that and just do it. And yeah, now it's 14 years later, and you have guided me along the way. We have changed up my practice. I've grown through it. I have gotten a lot of benefits through it, which I have talked about on other podcasts. And now, yeah, I have you here. So I would love to ask you how your evolution in practice um, has happened over the last 30 plus years, I think, and maybe also how you see the portrayal of yoga in the last 30 years having evolved, obviously from videotapes and um, teacher-student interaction to more of a social media, short reels, teaching approach, and of course much more, do this one technique and it will change your life kind of approach versus a long practice and get to know the details and let it evolve over time.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be on here with you, Tom, especially after all these years. And I'm well aware of your genuine interest, sincerity in practicing breath, pranayama, and keeping it up. That's key. So, yeah, it's almost 30 years when I was a young fella and getting into the yoga scene in New York. And so that's the mid 1990s. And the word of breath practice, pranayama, didn't exist. Obviously, it existed in a certain yogic and traditional settings, but in a more accessible, go to a yoga studio, it didn't exist, right? And even then, Ashtanga wasn't that known because even the first dedicated Ashtanga studio in New York didn't open until like 1996, right? So even though like one studio had been doing a bit, Jiva Mukti been doing a bit, so I found myself in this world, which is a sort of a hybrids of like the traditional yogas and the hybrids of Ashtanga Iyengar. And it's all just sort of starting to develop where the public interest is. I had no idea I was stepping in at that time, but this was what was starting to grow. And I had gone to both the traditional yoga studios, like ashram types, and the more, there was one or two sort of more hip at that time, like Jiva Mukti in New York. So I was in between those two as a young 23, 24-year-old. But I was automatically drawn to some of the few breath techniques they throw out. So I can still remember being up in my little tiny room in New York City trying to do these breath things on my own. Um, anyway, a couple of years of playing around with yoga and exploring, and it was sort of becoming, an interesting thing. Definitely in certain city markets, right? Not yet a sort of a global appeal, but definitely in certain like spots because some celebrities were getting into it. And I'm teaching, but then I get sort of around the same time fully committed to an Ashtanga yoga practice, which had a certain regimen and routine and commitment, and about the same time bringing that in breath practice for me. But it still was another 2 years. So this is like by 1999 into 2000, when almost at the same time I met up with Pattabhi Joyce, and then I met up with O.P. Tiwari. And I didn't think I'd be bothered committing myself to the sort of groupie Ashtanga stuff, because that's even how I saw it then. But having met him, there was a connection, and I just sort of fell into it. And when I commit to something, I commit. And then Tawari, um, he was there in New York, and only about 10 of us showed up at his session. And this was my introduction, you could say, to classic pranayama, right? So that's 25 years of classic pranayama, and in there, he just seemed to recognize or connect with me, and a very interesting relationship began. Even though it took another 2 years to sort of become more connected, but for me, it was like I was given a practice. He told me do these 3 or 4 things, and then I just went off and did it. And then I saw him again, and then he checked and gave me something else, and I went off and did it. So now simultaneously, my last few years in New York, I'm getting up in the morning, doing breath meditation, and then teaching, and then going to the ashtanga studio. That was the routine. And then when I left New York, that's sort of what I made my life as I came over to India and Thailand. And maybe that was the clincher, the differential. It was so from 2001 on, when still, like, if you came out to Asia, you couldn't really find yoga studios in the general sense, or definitely not these yoga retreat places. But there was a commitment on my side to, okay, just live it and practice it and see what happens. So I think that commitment has sort of given me the experience and then the qualification to be able to teach and talk about it. And yeah, it's taken a number of years, but with that commitment or with that experience, and I suppose the uh, unofficial qualification, if you like, to actually be able to share and teach people, you have to have that commitment and regularity of practice. And hopefully today that is still respected. It's still understood. Like, I've also been fully involved in the academic world, and that hasn't shifted to, okay, instead of doing a 3 month semester long course, we're going to do 10 5-minute videos or 10 30-second clips. There still is a step in, immerse, study, and really get to learn something. Now, of course, health span, wellness, these words start to buzz. Since COVID, the word around breath has buzzed. Needless to say, there's a lot of opportunists. And just as I saw, let's say with mindfulness, I see it now with breath, that it's easy to fake it a bit. It's easy to, okay, well, let's just sit here and do it. Yeah, you do a bit of this, you do a bit of that, or close your eyes and be quiet. You see, and of course, for some discerning people, that's not enough, and they're going to see through that. But for somebody that sort of wants to grab an opportunity, the way I heard it described nicely by somebody else talking actually about the fitness world, that the barriers to entry are low. So if I wanted to say I was a professor in a university, well, the barrier to entry for that took me probably at least 10 years, if not more. If somebody says they're a lawyer, or an accountant, or even a doctor, it's 5 to 15 years. If somebody says I'm a breath teacher, it's a weekend or 2 weeks, or and it took me 25 years to get, I suppose, what could be the highest qualification from the teacher. But even then, it was probably 5 years of practice to feel, okay, I know this, I'm solid, and I can teach it responsibly.
First of all, thank you for that whole summary of the 90s and 2000s. There's this aspect of course, you can make, it's easy to make it popular when you take one technique that is taken from pranayama or taken from any other technique, like 4-7-8 breathing, alternate nostril breathing, like something simple where you can talk, that you can explain in half a minute, and now just do that. It has amazing benefits. And then there's the diaphragmatic breath, or any of these things. Just breathe through your nose. It's also easy to study it. Like you cannot. It's very hard. Or I guess you can talk more about that later. It's hard to take what you feel as you keep doing the pranayama practice on a daily basis for 5 years, 10 years, etc., into a study of a group of people with control and etc., right? It's very hard to grasp that probably into a study. But it's easy to say, okay, we'll take two groups, and now one group does just normal breathing and the other group does alternate nostril breathing. Is there a difference? Or 4-7-8 breathing, or whatever it might be. So in terms of studying it, it needs to be simplified into one or two techniques, probably, to make it easy to study. And it's easy to share it even as a weekend teacher, like one weekend of study, and then now I can teach those two techniques. Can you say something about that, the study aspect, but also maybe how you see it in the sense of what happens when you do it for a couple of months or years on a regular basis, in terms of the depth that you feel then? What's your thought on that?
First off, the question is, what is one practicing? So there are differences between I've learned a breath technique to maybe having a breath practice to having a more committed extended breath practice, which might involve the area of pranayama. So my observation is, and not just now, but over the past, say, 25 years, is very few people take on a regular breath practice. More would take on the regular body practice, right? And again, that body practice could be a little bit of asana to hours of it, I like the ashtanga style. So, then the curiosity is, what can I do that's quick and has an impact? So, and even on myself, I will say, look, 3 minutes of one technique and you get a benefit. It's just like 3 minutes of swimming, you'd get a benefit. 3 minutes of walking, you get a benefit. But 3 minutes with one basic breath technique done daily, done regularly. Now the sweet minimal spot seems to be at around 5 minutes. And then it's hard to say, and I'm not that convinced that there's going to be a huge difference between if you did a box or a quadrangle or a 4-7-8, because it's a short amount of time and you're only focusing on the flow of breath in, maybe pausing flow of breath out, right? And this is only one aspect of what a more involved breathing practice is about. See? Oh, the breath comes in, maybe you hold it, you paused, and then the breath went out. But if we were getting into it as a more involved, a more comprehensive, holistic practice, then there are other aspects that involve bodily control, how the breath is held, where the focus is. And if you ask me, in terms of like what benefited me, and when I talked to my own teacher, Tawari, who's in his 90s now, and he reckons pranayama has been the best thing to keep him mentally sharp and age well. Then you look at the power in how holding the breath, retention is done, which is sort of what pranayama gets at, as opposed to, well, I did this inhale for 4, I just pause for 7, I exhale for 8, and so on. So in other words, if you regulate the breathing, you're going to get benefit. Just like if you go for a walk or you take a swim or you like to skip around or you run for a little bit, they're all movement activities. You're going to get benefit. Regulated breathing approaches that have some positive impact. And then the impact they have will be to a certain level, just like a little bit of walking and a little bit of moving. It has an impact, but just to a certain level. So then people talk about doing more cardiovascular, more resistance strength, put in half an hour, put in so many hours a week. You get all those recommendations, and then you're trying to find the sweet spot for longevity. So, so the question is, well, what is that when it comes to the breath? So then I would get more into, well, then you want more of a specific, dedicated 15-minute practice. So now we're going from 5 minutes a day, which is going to benefit you, to with whatever technique, as long as a certain amount of regulation in it, to 15 minutes where it needs a little more skill. And then if we're going to get a little more into it, there's yoga is pretty good at this. It offers a variety of techniques, pre-breath practices that condition the entire system, abdominal right up to laryngeal, to the jaw, tongue, mouth, all of this, because it's all part of the breathing process. So, so how much of that do you bring in? You see, so if somebody's running a lab and they want to do a quick study, which is okay, I'm going to have one group breathing, hyperventilating. I'm going to have one group slow breathing. I'm going to have one group doing a pause sigh or something. Another group maybe doing nothing. Okay, then let's see what happens. And one paper that came out on that a year or two ago, but it was done online and at a distance, which is fraught with its own issues. But it came out with a few conclusions. Oh, if you do the sigh, that's going to help you. And again, then we can make statements like, well, if you can do that type of breath, it might help you. You're in the moment anxiety, right? But for me, I always look at, well, that's great. There are little bits here and there. But when do you want to take this so it enters your system in a more impactful way, so that you literally across your physiology to psychology, there's a shift. So the things that might have bothered you and that you would want that little breath technique for, now you kind of build your way past them instead. So to your point that it's harder to take a full practice and put it into a setting. It is, but that's exactly what I did in my clinical trial, because breath practice doesn't work just on a 10 rounds or 3 minutes or 5 minutes of this technique or that technique, even though it's just like each ingredient in a cooked dish. You could eat it on its own, and you could even maybe eat it uncooked, and it will have health benefits. And you can look up those online, or in a nutrition book and so on. But you get the most rewarding value and the optimal kind of nutritional health impact by eating the combined cooked meal and its effect on body and mind. So in a similar way, the the traditions of breath, which are mainly the Chinese Taoist and the yogic pranayama traditions, they're the most comprehensive. They're the structured approaches. They have practices that when you say prescribed, it just means that there's a structure, there's an approach of things to do, and the teacher understands the student and is able to give it to them. And with the skill I've learned, you can kind of do that on a general level to a lot of people. And then as people progress in that, I need to get a little more specific and talk a little bit closer, like the way you and I do, right? So, But in terms of a study, I was able to take a group that we had, we were in a residential setting, and we worked through the building of practice from scratch uh, each day with what you might call pre-breath techniques, basic breath techniques, to building into pranayama, along with some body stuff and mind stuff. And then I had two control groups. And actually, the results from this, which will get published, you could say the major empirical scientific findings of that are they'll get published in the next few months. They're what I'm working on in this room right here now, and they have outcomes that haven't been seen yet in yogic or breath studies, because they haven't been approached this comprehensively or done this fully. Now, the ability to do this comes from well, I know how breath practice works. I know how pranayama works. I know how you do it with a group. I know how to teach it and grow it. Without that skill, then even though you could design a really excellent study from a scientific point of view, without the skill of how the breath practice works in a ongoing sense, then it would be very difficult to do. It's much simpler to pick three techniques and a nothing scenario and do a quick study, because you can do that in a few weeks, get the stats, and put something out there. And then for that to be confirmed, other groups would have to repeat it and so on. So what I did takes a little bit longer. It takes more of a commitment. Takes having full groups and in person. But then when you look at it, and maybe this is the case for people listening, at some point, people who tend to be interested in yoga and maybe the breath practice in yoga, they take some time out, right? Like they might go for a few weeks or a month or so to a facility like we have there in Thailand, Samahita, and call it training, call it whatever you want, but like you're taking time out to immerse yourself more in the practice. And that is where I see people make huge progress and change, because now you're in an environment where you're really doing it, and the environment supports you, and you're with other people, and you're learning it, and the teacher is assessing and guiding and making sure you're on track. And you after a few weeks of that is something you understand. It's in your system, and you can carry it on. So in a way, it's just like if you wanted to learn about doing accounting for your company, you might go off and do a 3-week intensive, right? You're not yet an accountant, but you're going to go off and do a 3-week bookkeeping course or something, and learn how to use QuickBooks. And then you come back from that, great, now I know this and I can apply it to my business. So even though we want the quick breath fix that I can do for 2 minutes, its real impact comes from taking a bit of time, working with it, and then after you've done that, you can take it in a condensed form. You can still just have 15-20 minutes a day, but now you understand it better. You're more skillful in it. You've done a bit of work. And it's that where the descriptions in the texts will say these differences and benefits start to arise, and that's the effect I was able to see, not just as a teacher with lots of students over 25 years, but in these scientific study. So much so that the what we saw in our group that followed this comprehensive practice was extremely interested in terms of like stress, mental health, and longevity. And these were things that did not come up in the control group, meaning that they didn't have the same, they didn't have any of these benefits. Control group that just did asana, just the body stuff with basic breath,
Okay.
and then the other control group did nothing. They were passive control. and I deliberately had two control groups because I was given good advice by top academic people, but also to really see how this works. So from what we've seen in the teaching side and with people, and then what I see now from the practice is a startling impact in terms of longevity, mental health. And the biggest factor, this is breaking news that I haven't been able to even speak about it in a public setting yet, because the updated statistics on the longevity one just came back to me a few weeks ago. But the biggest factor determining these outcomes, meaning the when we say longevity, we say cellularly, the ability to extend, therefore longevity, therefore like you could say just looking younger, feeling better, potentially a longer life, potentially. And then also on the mental health side, um, engagement. Engagement is the primary predictor. So in other words, the more you get into it, that would predict these outcomes. And the less, you just do it. Oh, okay, here I am. I'll just do these things. You cannot expect the same outcome. So this, if you ask me, one, yeah, it's great to talk about longevity and mental health, stress, anxiety, etc. But to point out that the key to it, that yes, those changes can occur, but the key to those changes occurring is the engagement factor. And that is hard to replicate back to your question, in this one technique for 2 minutes versus that one technique for 2 minutes and so on. You see? And even then, what are you actually looking for? So that's what you can get a quick result, but it makes it dubious even scientifically. Whereas to get a bit more added, yeah, you have to design a bigger program and get more into it. So the program, the study that I designed and then have completed and have the results on, mimicked the closest thing I could do to a practice learning setting.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of this. It's I have so many things that I want to ask just from what you said. I mean, first of all, it's great. I so much look forward to reading this study because essentially 10 years ago, whenever you started talking about that you are engaging in this process, in this studying process, I remember the idea was, let's take someone, you, that has this extended period in teaching, in practicing, in feeling the effects, and now is also studying it and trying to understand it scientifically, right? In the sense that when you take somebody who is studying something that they haven't really practiced for 20, 25 years, they can only ask so many good questions about it because they're only coming from the mentally understood side, not from a embodiment side. And so I'm very happy that you, as for what it seems, have really managed to include those aspects of the group setting, the teacher-student relationship, the building of a of a practice setting that is including the pre-breath exercises, those kriyas, tension releasing techniques, which definitely have a really deep effect on preparing the nervous system and body and mind to all these to the subtle effects that the breath then creates. And that also is one other aspect that I wrote down here for me. People have anxiety, people are just chronically stressed, they are overwhelmed, they are depressed, they have all kinds of physical, mental, emotional issues. And now they are looking for something to solve that, to give them a little relief. Maybe, you know, a little bit of practice, a little bit of yoga, a little bit of breathing. And so they come to the practice with their mindset and with their physical base. And so if someone is unable to access the diaphragm in a proper way, and or if someone has extremely high hypersensitive nose, throat, tongue, jaw area, and now they do any kind of breathing technique, they will not be able to do it in the way that it was meant to be, right? At least that's what I see in my experience from teaching and with seeing what people are doing. You will not have this, like if you force yourself into a 4-7-8 breath, but you cannot comfortably hold or pause your breath for 7 seconds, you will create even more tension, will create even more stress trying to keep up with the technique. Or, you know, the box breathing is the same thing. If you cannot comfortably do one breath of 16 seconds, you cannot do 4-4-4-4, right? And so just following some technique that has been proven or whatever to help with anxiety does not help if you don't have the requirements physically, emotionally, mentally. And so there again, the teacher comes in. Or would you say something to that shortly?
Yeah, well, so you bring up 4-7-8, and I was just with one of the, or the, let's say the world's expert on the neuroscience of breath, and we had a very interesting conversation. And what's interesting is that when it comes to the practice, he would be new, but when it comes to the neuroscience, he'd be the expert. And the 4-7-8 came up, and that's popular because Dr. Andrew Weil had put it down. But the question is, well, where did he get it from, right? And how do you do it? In my experience, having taught thousands, and I always ask, is 4 seconds inhale a challenge for you? And maybe for a third of the group it is. Right? Often I have to, like if I'm guiding a group, because you kind of have to go least common denominator for a group, then it's you want to have everybody at the same level, even though somebody could inhale for 6 seconds. But the majority are only going to be comfortable at 3. So exactly what you're saying. One, if 4-7-8 is a stretch, you can potentially, and same with box 4-4-4-4 and so on. You can potentially, in a subtle sense, do a little more harm than benefit, right? Because there's a bunch of steps that have been skipped prior to that, and some of those steps, as I said, are like the pre-breath, and then some of them are just like basic breath development. And then if it's something like, this is my concern with 4-7-8, holding the breath for 7, which in the grand scheme of things is not that long. But when you're a little bit fresher to it and you have to do it round after round, it actually creates its own tension, builds its own stress. Now, I would say the majority of people are not doing that 7 as say the yogic text would prescribe, which is it's one thing to breathe with the diaphragm, but it's another thing to maintain the pelvic floor. It's another thing to contain the breath in the thoracic cavity, upper abdomen, thoracic cavity, and to not have any of that pressure from the breath impact in the head to the brain, which is where all the problems arise. See? So pranayama is safe until you start retaining for longer than you should. See? And even if you're not going to call it pranayama, you're just saying, oh, it's a breath technique called 4-7-8, it still has those potential problems in it. That was my response back to him as well. That, yeah, it's fine, except one, you may not even be aware because you're just pausing the breath for 7 seconds, right? You're at best, you're missing the real benefit of that retention. And at worst, the pressure from that retention is pushing upward too high. And when the effect of these things comes about, it's 6 to 9 months later, even 12 months later. So that works in like the whoa, it's really helping me. Like you start to know that later down the line, but little things that can creep in and create a problem, they also don't show up immediately unless you do something like extreme and drastic. So back to like having a practice setting. Like let's say you have an urban studio, you're in a city setting, so then people can make a point to regularly come, just specifically for those practices, once or twice a week, and then they keep it up themselves, and so they have the motivation and they have the guidance and the check-in. The way I've taught the last number of years in a retreat setting, that people come and stay for 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and we really focus on it. Then you can build it, and in that period of weeks, it has its own change and impact. But again, it goes through back to what you might call a structured approach. It goes to but we want to see how the basic breath is working. Like I was asked a question, what's the optimal breath? I think it's the wrong question. There is no optimal breath, right? But there is a basic breath. There is a base breath. And if you don't take care of that first and you just jump in a box of 4, 7, 8, then you are potentially missing some of the benefits, but also it's slightly reckless because there are subtleties here. Why did these texts say careful, careful, slowly, slowly, gradual, gradual? Like that's one of the most. There's a Sanskrit word for that, and it's repeated 31 times in the Hatha Yoga text. 31 times. Carefully, carefully, slowly, slowly, gradually, gradually, and then it says, treat the breath like treat and tame and train the breath like you are training a wild tiger or wild elephant. Right? Now, I've never trained a wild elephant or a wild tiger, but just the thought of it, and you approach in micro bits, and you build up the trust and the connection over months to years. So when I say over months to years, maybe not this audience and this podcast, but otherwise people are going to tune out. Right? People are like, shit, I just want something now,
Yeah.
And I get that. Okay. So then we're back to, well, then what are the more responsible and effective things to give just now? And if you're breathing in for 3 and you pause for 3, I think it's no problem. But I would still emphasize lengthen the exhale, which is why I don't fully give 2 thumbs up to the box breathing at all, right? I think it's more of a quadrangular approach, if anything. And because if you just have a short number of seconds for inhaling, like 3, you don't need to. That's really just when you get to the 3 second after the inhale. That's really just a pause as opposed to an actual retention. But if you were doing 4, 7, 8, that 7 seconds is more of an actual retention. So that needs a different approach and a different bit of care. And just like you brought up, if one hasn't taken care of some of the regulatory aspects, the conditioning, the preconditioning across the tongue, jaw, throat, chest, and definitely what's going on in the abdomen into the pelvis. Without attention to that, then your breathing is at best haphazard. And like you say, it's less skillful. Therefore, you could put yourself under a degree of stress. I remember because the pranayama approach that sort of came through ashtanga was pretty rough. It wasn't very well refined, and sorry if anybody's offended, but you know, I have the experience in having learned it in different ways, and so some people that would do it with a teacher used to joke and say, "Oh yeah, it's our Saturday morning suffocation practice," and it sounds funny, but it's actually quite serious, you know. The holding of the breath without having developed the proper support brings all sorts of issues. The develop the proper support, breathe well, and build it up brings all sorts of benefits.
Yeah.
So, and that's my direct experience with it, and why, yeah, maybe it's less online, social media, woohoo, you know, hype, right?
Yeah.
It's because if 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 you want to get people excited, you either have to have a bit of hype online and or put sensation into the practice. Yet a breathing practice is sort of the opposite. It's non-sensational. It's completely non-pretentious, right? And that requires a degree of maturity. So we can talk to the woohoo group, but then those of us that understand it, let's just put out a few responsible things. But then what people are getting carried away on is fast pumping and hyperventilating and all of that. And that's fraught with issues. And even the neuroscientists that I've spoken to recently on that are concerned and see those issues. And then there's sort of a mature group who are going to discern, who are going to look at this. Actually, the word we'd use, Tom, is sincerity, and
Mm-hmm.
that was my translation to get at sincerity was that concept of engagement. So sincerity is sort of maturity. Yes, I'll do this. I'll pay attention. I'll get into it, and then I'll keep it up. Then it becomes really part of like the meditative approach, meditative technique, and then it has the benefits that I'd say are generally described across the board for breath.
Yeah. So I guess to summarize, don't go for a fast approach. Learn the basics. Learn a base breath, as you called it. Learn it ideally under the guidance of a teacher over a couple of weeks, either immersing yourself in a retreat place such as Samahita, where you are right now, or with a teacher locally, but under some guidance. So you first learn that base before you jump into stronger practices. Because also from my understanding, I mean, first of all, maybe to translate it to a physical practice, like you said, you know, go for a walk, go for a run, do a little bit of mild resistance training or cardio training. If you come and you don't know how to move your ankle properly because you have worn the wrong shoes all your life, or your knee is messed up, or your hips are super closed, or your lower back is problematic because of sitting all day, and now you hear running is good, so you go for a run, and after a week you feel your ankles, knees, and hips, you yes, there's some benefit cardiovascularly and being out, but you first have to learn the basics of running again, putting more weight on your legs. And in the same way with breathing, you first have to learn the basics, the base breath, before you jump into stronger practices, which I guess all come from a place of having a positive effect when properly used. I mean, whether it's tumor breathing or you know, any of these techniques that are advocated strongly, they all come with some benefit if done properly in the right context by the people that are ready for it. Would you agree, or is that anything to add to that?
Well, what I would add is that it's even there's one extra level of complexity with breath because everyone is breathing all day,
Mm-hmm.
and they have been since they're born. You may not have run for a few years, even if you just ran for the train or a taxi, but You can live your life and not have to run, and then take up running and find that your body is a mess, and so you need to do a few things. But breathing, this is why there wasn't enough interest in breathing, both as practice and even a scientific study pre-COVID, because people were like, well, we're breathing already, and that's that. What else is there to know? And so the challenge there is that the majority, and maybe, I would go out on a limb and say everybody, like 100% of humans, in their very early years, childhood years, the breath maladapts. And that's because we are emotional. We have an emotional life. We're emotional human beings. Doesn't mean we're emotionally out of balance, though some are. What it means is that, because I watched this carefully when my own two sons were young, that you can be 3 and you can get very upset about something. And I would watch it and the whole breath would be affected, right? So one, the breath is revealing the upset, but 2, if the child is repeatedly traumatized by that and doesn't understand, the impact isn't just psychological, it goes physiological, and the breathing immediately gets disrupted. And that's at this early stage. And then we just, life causes us to pick up other bad habits of, see, I've got my mouth open now. I'm speaking a lot. Now, it's taken me a while to train myself so that even like all these words I'm saying right now are all on an exhale, and then I'll have a very quick pause. And I just took it in through the nose. But a lot of podcasts I hear, even ones talking about breath, are I sucked in through the mouth, and I'm talking sucked in through the mouth. So all these dysregulated and bad habits are there with the breath, and they've been there since we're super young, unconsciously. So that's what you're up against, and the diaphragm is a muscle you can't even see, and you can only access about 48% of its muscle fibers in a voluntary breathing sense. So it has all this other power that's used for other things. And then it's a question of how do I even train myself to access that when I haven't been prior to this, you see? And anybody can hold their breath, right? Kids do it. People put their head under the water in the pool and hold their breath and so on. But that's not what we're talking about here at all. I would say it's not even close. So if the advice I would give is um, approach it as you would any beneficial activity. That there are steps that you can learn and build through, and it's just like if I want to go out and play this kind of new sport that I think has initially come out of Spain. Maybe it's around Europe and getting big in the US, etc. Padel, right? It's like with a tennis ball racket, but sort of like squash rules as well. Um, but if I want to go and learn that, or now surfing or something, then there are steps to build and go on and go through it. So, of course, I suppose average breath programs are doing that. It's hard to get that through the snippets online, of course, and maybe somebody will find something online on Instagram that's a minute and it was like, oh, that was beneficial. I like that. Just like I learned about, that guy said something about spinach in your smoothie. I like that, so you can add tidbits to your overall routine. But if you really want to, and I would say the potential for huge benefit is there in a committed longer term breath practice. Like at this stage in my life where I don't know what age I am anymore, but the maybe the single most impactful practice is that concentrated time I've taken to work very connectedly with the breath and how pranayama is and the way the retention is. And that had to be developed over time, and but not too long. But then it pays off. And if I look at Tawari, who's in his 90s, it's still paying off.
Yeah. I mean, it's how I also, again, coming from ashtanga and from an intense practice. And when I remember 10 years ago, you started to kind of get off the intensity of the asana practice and started talking about, no, we need to talk about fitness as a more broader thing. And you introduced the bikes, the stationary bikes at Samahita, and plus asana practice in a more wider context, not just ashtanga, plus pranayama as a combination for more well-rounded approach. And back then I didn't really understand. I didn't want to understand it, I guess. I was still too much involved in ashtanga, and I am
Yeah.
still. But the idea is, or how my understanding has grown now, is that it's great to have the intensity, especially when you're young, and to kind of really open up the body and clear the mind through essentially the constant hitting against your own walls until you realize that they are just an illusion and you can kind of open up yourself. And then to have that asana practice, but then to know that you can also cut back on it, to maybe have, like you said, this 20-minute practice or only 10-minute practice of asana that gives you as much as the 2-hour practice gave you before, because you have understood it, what it does. And I'm really grateful that now I have my pranayama practice as my main practice, and I know I can continue doing this through sickness and health, essentially, until I'm, 90 or however old I'm going to be. I can still do the pranayama practice with a little support of asana practice as appropriate, instead of thinking I have to keep up a certain level of asana no matter what, whether I'm 40, whether I'm 60, whether I'm 80, or whether I'm feeling really good afterwards or not, in the sense of, do I keep doing it even though I feel how it's not benefiting me, like an intense ashtanga practice might do at a certain time in life. Did I understand you well
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, what you're bringing up is my own experience of being open enough to let go of particular modes or intensity or identity with practice mode. Um, out of all the people that ended up living in Mysore and committing to Ashtanga practice, I might have been one of 7 that really, really did that for years, and was committed. And then at a certain point, I left that as a system. And again, based on my own integrity, that, okay, its effect on me now is different, and there's need for a shift. But also, my as opposed to, I'm just going to do this because it's supposed to be good for you, which was a line that I never really agreed with or respect. It's more like, continue to look at it, continue to check in, continue to feel. So there would be the experience I felt in my own body, mind, but then also really taken apart the nature of the practice. So my conclusion was, well, there's a couple of errors in the overall Ashtanga approach. And so even like the series or the sequences I'll teach now, or our team will teach at Samahita, kind of invert like the Ashtanga approach. So you take out all this excessive effort that goes on with the actual asanas, which are mainly the seated ones, take out all the excessive effort, and you put it in with what is essentially pre-yoga. Even Pattabhi Jois called Sun Salutes pre-yoga, but also standing poses are pre-yoga, right? And guess what? Pre-yoga is still good. I happily do it. But let's just be clear, it has a different tone and a different effect. So at a different point in life, and it's not so much what age you are, like you said, when we're younger, and then, but that's because, you started in your 20s and I started in my 20s. And then it has a time life to it. But I've seen people start in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, and get into this physical practice. Now there'll be some limitations. The main limitation I've seen, if you're in an older decade of life, is around back bends. But otherwise, there isn't much of a barrier to somebody starting at 40 or 50 than at 20 or 30 in terms of physically getting in and moving on with it, right? You just have to, what's the state of your joints, and what kind of a life did you have before this? So it's more so that after a certain period of time, it's had its impact, and your system will need a different approach. And if pre-yoga is one thing, but that's mostly your practice, then you should realize, oh, actually, my asana practice was mainly pre-yoga. There was a lot of jumping, moving, flowing, standing poses, sun salutes, and sun salutes in between those other ones. So then you separate that, and so that was my view. Was you can get benefit from the workout aspect, whether it's in pre-yoga or even more so in terms of high intensity stuff on the bikes or other core work, strength training, resistance training, and all that stuff those things are studied 1,000 times more than yoga practice. And so there's some great information about them. So I felt, it's better to put that in, offer, because people need the cardio activity. You can't be expecting your pre-yoga to give you all that cardio. People need different aspects of strength and resistance, and use of the legs. So then you could keep up pre-yoga to yoga, asana practices, and you could have these other fitness approaches. But then it's just understanding where they fit, right? So when it's asana as yoga practice, it becomes this really excellent practice of how it affects, nurtures, conditions your nervous system. So if you have done, that's why I do the pre-yoga before it, all the moving and jumping and handstands and sun salutes and standing poses. Do that before or separately, and also separately the other fitness approaches. And then even if you were to kind of put one after the other, like the asana yoga after the other one, there's a little bit of a gap, resting period, and then you can get in, and you want to touch the tone required for your nervous system in those asanas that you won't get if you're doing a lot of moving, jumping, which is fun, but that's why I'm just calling it pre-yoga. And it's a totally different tone if you're pumping it on a bike or doing kettlebells or TRX or something, right? So they're all beneficial, but the question is, do you just mix them up, or can you approach them in their own value space? And that's my personal approach. And I get a lot of benefit out of a small bit of the pre-yoga, a small bit of the strength cardio. And you don't even have to do those every day, but I'll keep up the yoga asana every day, because that has this incredible impact on my overall physiology and how I function and feel. And that, of course, serves and supports the other aspects of sitting and the breath and so on. Now, it takes a bit of understanding how that works, but then if you don't know how it works, but there's a teacher who does, then you can get guided well. So the now, if you're kind of new into the physical yoga part, then you just want to go. The change I would make is what I've done here is just put all the action part of the asana in the first half, and then the kind of more deeper approach to asana in the second half. And you can still have a full, call it yoga workout. And if you start that at 25 or 55, you'll still have the same probably excitement and enthusiasm. But there might be more 25s than 55s, and at 55 you might be happier to do some of the smoother stuff. But then you should keep up maybe 20 minutes of the core cardio type workout, right? If we want to look at things that benefit us going into the later years, and one of the big motivations for me was I used to, and I still do, watch those who are 10 to 25 years older than me in the yoga world. And I noticed, to be frank, I noticed that their bodies didn't start faring too well as time went on. Either because you just stayed stuck on the same asana approach, or none of the other strength-giving practices were there. So that's been actually the biggest sort of surprise and shocker almost for me, is because I know all these guys, and I've been like, wow, the body's weak, or their health is off, or there's still just stuck on the one asana technique. And then I'm listening to someone like Jane Fonda, who's in her late 80s, who's saying, well, thank God I have muscles. Thank God I did those other workouts when I was younger, because, and the science says that, that is crucial to a smoother ride through the later years. So, if we're talking under a yoga umbrella, I would still say, be smart about this. You need some strength resistance stuff. You need some cardio stuff. How much can change over the years? Yoga asana is excellent. Question is, are you going to do more the pre-yoga moving bit, or the deeper bit? And the deeper bit might be more difficult to access, so you need a bit more of the moving bit. And you could have 10 minutes of the moving bit and 15 minutes of the deeper asana, and in less than half an hour you've had a great practice. And I find that without doing much resistance or cardio, I find that alone has kept me in like a high fitness and tip-top shape. But I'll always commit to the seated breath practice. And if I had no other time for anything else, I would have the seated breath practice. And when that happens, and I finish it, which does involve pretty intense breath practice and retaining of breath, but my system feels like it's had a 2-hour workout, just from that focused breath practice. So there's something going on with that, and then when you mix in the other body things, I think, and maybe this will be through another study, I don't know, but I think that's a great combination for feeling good in your body, keeping health, keeping physiology going well, and keeping the mind in good shape, psychology-wise. And I've just been through the last just over 2 years. I got a bad hit of the shingles up here in the right part of my the ophthalmic trigeminal nerve up here, and then it destroyed the nerve there, so there was a high intensity neuralgia pain.
Okay.
So for a while I couldn't do physical things, and then all the breath stuff I knew I had to drop, except for one specific practice, mainly the Shitali, and I couldn't do breath retention for a year and a half, right? So only in the last 6, 8 months have I come back. Uh, but the thing is, I kept up daily practice, even when
Mm-hmm.
I was suffering from intense neuralgia. And but I had to change it. I had to modify it, and I was able to come back a bit quicker to some of the physical things. But the what I learned from this is when I increased the intensity of my breath, this would go into a lot more intense pain, and I was like, wow, that shows you the effect of this on the system very quickly. Now, I'm not able to do it at the moment, so I back off. But what about for other people that don't know how this works, or they just see something online and they just jump on it? And my nervous system was raw, so I was feeling the impact immediately, and I had enough experience and skill to back away. And as I said, it took a year and a half to slowly come back to it, you know, but
Yeah.
humbly knocked down to the base, no retention, just one breath technique, keeping it simple, to not be able to do much more till at least a year and a half later. But seeing that when I did change it and add the intensity, that, oops, that's a strong effect, back off. So uh, now that this is all settled, there's a little bit of sensation left on the eyebrow and up along the scalp, but I can get fully back in on practice, and I'm back to that full feeling of upliftment physiologically, and I noticed just since March a shift in sharpness of brain again. So the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, life is going to hit us with different stuff at whatever age. And that is not a reason to drop some of these practices. If anything, you adapt them and keep it up as a support.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, it was a painful and difficult period, but I've come out benefiting on the other end.
Yeah, we learn from all these challenges. And just like what you said, I also is my experience in the sense that when we have a practice like this ongoing, it builds such an awareness so that when some part of the body doesn't function as well, we have a very well versed assessment of what's going on in the body. I remember when I had 2 years ago, 3 years ago, during the pandemic, I got sick, and I was feeling I was checking in with my pranayama, and because I was coughing, I couldn't hold the breath as long. But I saw, okay, I still have my full lung capacity. I I still have the chemical balance that I can hold the breath as long. So I was very calm because I knew I was good in that sense. While if someone that doesn't have any awareness of how long they can hold their breath, how can they breathe, how can they regulate the nervous system, if something goes off, they have no idea how to assess it and how to feel, is that now, am I good, am I not so good? And that, of course, then breeds worry and anxiety and so on top of the physical condition. And also, how you said with pre yoga and so on, I feel that base understanding of finally controlling my diaphragm, having an understanding of my nervous system and how to regulate it to a certain degree helps me really with everything from family matters, dealing with people, dealing with loved ones, dealing with my own emotions, but also resistance training, yoga, all the fun stuff, the handstands, the jumps, and all of that. When you regulate the pressure, all of that becomes easier because the whole body works as a whole. You recover faster, all these things. So again, thank you for introducing me to that breath back then, or for letting our paths cross back then, because I really feel, because of this strong base, everything else that I try to achieve in life is more achievable, because of that deep understanding of my own body and psychology. And yeah, and
Well,
so
let's say a special thanks to your lovely wife then, Sandra,
yes, yeah, yes, for
who
bringing us together.
yeah, came as a student and then introduced us along the way.
Yeah.
And that's great to see. It's a combination. It's practice, it's relationship, it's life, it's parenthood. All of that grow, and maybe the thread through it all is love. You know.
Yes, that's a great way to end it. But I do have one more thing that I definitely want to mention. You are now at Koh Samui in your beautiful retreat center, Samahita, where I also taught some retreat a couple of years ago, and where I just loved, from the first time that I came, the food is amazing. It's obvious that the place has been built for spiritual development, for yoga practice. So it's not just, okay, we are a hotel, let's build some yoga place, shala type, where we can also offer that, but rather this is a place built for yoga. And now let's build and design everything accordingly. And it comes across through everything that you offer, from the detox to the yoga to the resistance training stuff that you have, the location right at the beach, the, the rooms, everything is beautiful. And you have some upcoming retreats, and if I understood that well, you will lead the first full breath pranayama teacher training certification course at Samahita in the coming summers, in July 2024, 2025, and ongoing. And I think that's an amazing new course concept that you have created here. And I guess for anybody that wants to start teaching, this is the way to go. Can you say a couple of things about that?
Yeah. So this year at Samihita retreat on the beach, I will do a 2 week, you could say, pranayama focused course that is also an advanced teacher training course. So people that want to get 100 hours, it qualifies for that. There's a study theme, if you like, and yeah, that material comes out of the extra work I did in scholarship. So, so not only did I do like a clinical trial, empirical, scientific study, half of the PhD was into all the old texts and practices and where all these things come from, etc. So, so then the last year was sort of the earlier phase. That's why it's more classical philosophy. This year, I focus on a particular time period, which is about uh, 500 years after Christ CE, current era, to the 1800s, right? And that's the period of Tantra, the development of these practices, and the development of Hatha Yoga, Hatha Raja Yoga specifically. So the material and the history around that. So if one is like teaching yoga or teaching breath-based yoga stuff, then and in terms of like gaining advanced training hours, I would say that's a really powerful topic to get into. But most of the time, most of the hours in the day are spent in practice anyway. Meditative, a lot of pranayama focus and me focused with people. And it hasn't changed in the last 20 years. I've been doing the advanced training. What you're calling a new way is just how I've broken down the different areas of yoga, philosophy, psychology, you could say, into different categories, different time periods, different focuses. But then at Samahita, the aim has been to, well, this has actually gone on since we opened 21 years ago. There's always been daily breath practice, right? Call it the pre-breath techniques to the breath techniques to like pranayama techniques. So even if you just come on a daily regular visit, we just say you book yoga course cycle. So then you've got all the classes available to you. Morning breath, meditation, morning dynamic asana, afternoon core and cycle and restorative asana. But you're, at the simplest level you're even learning and building a breath practice there. What I'm doing is for people that are like, yeah, I'm into this. I really want to do more, not just with breath, but breath as it's structured and presented in the kind of yogic pranayama technique. And that's the experience and expertise I can share. So that's what those programs are about. So in some ways, I've as I've gone through this study world, I've kind of pulled back from some teaching, but I'm still committed to teaching breath and pranayama. And there's a wonderful team there at Samahita who teach a lot of other stuff too, who are very skilled and experienced. And years ago I used to do, and I've gone to you in Zagreb and done lots of yoga workshops. So that's sort of something that seems to have left me as well. Because now there'll be maybe, let's see, new aspects that come out, new ways to like teach and get stuff out there, And like you say, after the completion of all the academic world, and now being involved in like university, teaching stuff here, and then there'll be other things to do for the public. It is a time to not just offer quick breath techniques for 1 minute out there, but to kind of still use these platforms and get more out there. So let's see how that goes. For me over these next months and years,
Yeah.
Maybe if we're talking in a year from now, there'll be some updates on that.
Wonderful. Well, I would love to have you back. I definitely can recommend to anybody who's listening, whether they want to go spend 1 day at Samahita or 2 weeks or longer. It's a wonderful place to join you this summer if they're in
Thank
the
you. Yeah.
area. And I would love to have you back once your studies are out and maybe a book is out and all the things that are planned to maybe go more into the details of what you have studied. And thank you so much for being here, for sharing all this great thoughts and ideas on the practice and well-being.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to those who've listened to us. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a beautiful day.